and welcome to these Business Day Dialogues live in partnership with UNISA Graduate School of Business Leadership. I'm Joanne Joseph. Great to be with you this morning. Today, we're looking at the rather remarkable leadership journey of Absa Retail and Business Banking Division over the past 3 years. Arrie Rautenbach, who is Chief Executive of Absa Retail and Business Bank, is about to tell you about their fixed phase back to basics strategy. It transformed the business dramatically, as you may be aware. And while divesting from Barclays PLC a few years ago, Absa realized it had to take stock of where it was and where it wanted to be. It had noticed a decline in the previous 10 years, which had set it back. So it needed to claw back quite a lot of that ground. But it also set itself some ambitious targets in 2018. For example, it was determined to double its share of banking revenues in Africa to 12%. It wanted to focus on transformation to drive sustainability, and it needed to rebrand to metamorphose into a truly African bank. Now, 3 years later, Arrie will tell you that it's managed to achieve those and many more goals along the way. But how exactly did it get there, and what hurdles were faced along the way? So we're going to hear the details from Arrie Rautenbach on those issues in a moment. But we're also drawing in the voices of two UNISA academic experts, Acting Academic Director of UNISA SBL, Mr. Andile Novachi, and Piet Venter, Professor of Strategy, also at UNISA SBL. Their voices are just as important in helping us break down methodically these successes and trying to understand how we can apply them to other African businesses. So let me first of all welcome Mr. Andile Novachi. He's going to fill us in on what he hopes will come out of this discussion today. Over to you, Andile. Mr. Novachi, just to please unmute yourself. 2021 proverb.
Thank you, Joanne, and good morning to everyone, and welcome to today's talk about the Absa story. The exciting thing about this story is not only its rich epistemic value, but it's how it resonates with and reflects who we are about as the school, as the university. As the university, we are in the business of serving humanity. And you'll see in the Absa story that there are hallmarks. It talks about humanity. It talks about courage, not being afraid of deviating from the conventional, from the norm of doing things. So, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce my fellow panelists to you. Mr. Arrie Rautenbach, as has been mentioned, that is the Chief Executive of the Absa Retail and Business Banking, including financial services. He's such an accomplished award-winning retail banker who boasts about 27 years worth of experience. Arrie started working on the ground in the branch. He quickly rose within the ranks in the Absa Group in a selling function that got him to spearheading the group's strategy formulation as it worked to restore its market leadership position in the banking sector. He also led the separation process following Barclays' divestment from the bank. Arrie, credited with a keen eye for a best-in-class talent, has developed industry-leading expertise in the group, which fully reflects the country's transformational demographics. His remarkable achievements include market share growth, digital transformation, and a market-leading growth strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, the important thing about Arrie is that he's an SBL alumni. And now Prof. Venter, my colleague, is a professor of strategy at the SBL and is an acting academic director in Arrie for executive education. Prof. Venter holds an MBA degree from the University of Pretoria and a doctoral degree in business management from the University of South Africa. Prior to the academic bar, Prof. Venter spent 10 years working at Telkom in various marketing and strategic positions. Prof. Venter has published extensively in the fields of research and marketing, and is an editor and author of a number of fields of strategy and marketing. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that, I'm saying, relax you. I'm hoping that really the talk will really bring you into the achievements of this of the Absa Group in their journey. And back to you, Joanne. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Andile. Arrie, I see you've been firmly claimed by UNISA SBL there. So, Arrie, I'm going to ask you to please just frame for us this journey that Absa has been on in the last few years.
Joanne, thank you very much. And Andile, thank you very much for that introduction as well. You were talking about the 2021 problem just now of forgetting to unmute. But it is really a reflection of just how much the world has changed, in the last 18 months or so. Whilst this would have been very much a face-to-face engagement, probably with people in the audience, we're doing this now via technology. And I think, in times that we find ourselves in right now, whilst it may be difficult to connect face-to-face, I think, Joanne, these still very, very important for us. And again, a great opportunity and sort of share some thoughts and at the same time share the Absa story, a story that we are very proud of, a story that has taken a lot of courage and a lot of emotion and a lot of grit over the last couple of years as we started the separation from Barclays, but hopefully a story that I believe that the audience would get some benefit from today and will sort of equally share and gain from that experience. I also just want to thank the SBL for making this opportunity available and also for the Business Day. Joanne, I think in the conversation, I think it's important that we spend a little bit of time just around the context. You have touched on it earlier, just around the sort of 10 years before the separation, the Barclays era. The sort of case for change for us when the announcement was made, to disinvest from Africa, which was obviously a big decision across all the different stakeholders, and then really spend a bit of time on the retail and business banking journey since we started that off the back of that reset. So, if I can start with the context, if you go and look at our history, you would see that the Barclays Africa Group, as it was known at the time, consisted of about 12 of us being in about 12 markets, but the South African business, Absa Bank, was purchased in 2005. The other markets have been within Barclays control in some cases for over 100 years. So obviously, we've been part of that context for a long period of time. What you have seen, though, is in the last couple of years, the last sort of 10 years or so, you started seeing a real decline in market share across all our businesses, not just in South Africa, across all the markets. And obviously with the divestment decision, as a group and as an executive committee at the time, that was a real sort of, whilst we were in shock at the time, that was a real sort of gift to us as an organization to reset our journey and to sort of take control of our own destiny. And in that part, become truly African again, which was absolutely core to the decision that we've made. So everything we did from that point on, needed to reflect us being a truly African organization and our Africanness as we talk about it. And a lot of you may recall we coined the word Africanacity, which means really finding ways to get things done. And I can't explain the journey in any other way, but in an Africanacity way. So we had to deal with being part of a global parent for such a long period of time. You would imagine by that time it's ingrained in our DNA and the way we were thinking. And as we started resetting, everything we did from that point on was very deliberate to start changing how we experience our own organization, how the colleagues experience our organization, how all our stakeholders experience our organization, and how our customers experience our organization. When you're part of a global system for such a long period of time, and the model is one of centralization and control and command, you do become disconnected with your markets. And that is certainly the position that we found ourselves in. So as we embarked on that strategy reset process, which was a phenomenal experience for us as a group exco, everybody that was involved in that process, we were very deliberate from the beginning that we needed to do that in a unique way, in a very different way to how it's been done before. And we actually had one core design principle when we started that journey, and that is that we wanted every colleague in our organization, and at that time we were about 42,000 colleagues, we wanted every colleague in our organization to feel that their fingerprint was in that strategy. Their fingerprint was in our brand, because we really needed to create that emotional bond with our organization and with our customers. So the process we went through was a very bottom-up process. We try and involve every colleague in our organization throughout that process. And I think we haven't completed that strategy process, Joanne, until we were done right at the end. So, and the reason why I'm saying that is towards the end, once we've got the framework of that strategy in place, once we've got the feedback from the colleagues in that process, we actually had a session with the top 150 leaders in the organization. And they still gave us a tremendous amount of input into that process. And then we actually had a session with about 550 colleagues that were identified by the rest of the organization as the change leaders, where we made the final changes to that, to that strategy. And only once we were done with that, did we feel that our strategy was complete. And as I said earlier, everybody had their fingerprint, on that strategy. And then we take it to the board, which obviously got sanctioned by our board. So a very powerful process, very emotional process, a very deep process for the whole organization to go through. But it started resetting everything that we were standing about, that we stood for, and that we wanted to achieve coming out of that. Very much so, the cultural journey that we wanted to go on. So I think that context for us is very important. Off the back of that, we also changed our operating model, and we created what we called a business-led operating model, coming from a functionally-led operating model, which was very centrally controlled and command, to one where we felt that it should be led by our businesses, because we wanted to be closer to our customers, closer to our markets. And we were very clear from a cultural perspective that we wanted to distribute the decision-making as deep as possible into our organization. So you see a shift of deep empowerment, through that process. And you saw that obviously in the strategy design. Off the back of that, we embarked on the retail and business banking journey. And if you know Absa and its history, you would know that retail banking is, at our core, it's in our DNA, So today still, it's a big part of our business. And obviously, with it being our framework and our canvas, and our parameters to operate within, we embarked on the on the resetting process for retail and business banking, which you touched on earlier. And when we started that process, we were actually very clear that we needed some very core design principles, so call it values if you want to, as we embarked on this journey. And they were very simple, but not basic, if I can say that. So the first one was what we call the principle of closer to colleagues. And this for us is fundamentally important to how we run our business today. The second one is what we call closer to customers. And the third one is what we call in control. So those three basic design principles today still, Joanne and Pieter and Dila and everybody else, forms the core of everything we do across our organization. So whether we respond to a COVID crisis, or whether we respond to the situations in KZN or a normal situation in the market, those core design principles for us absolutely at the heart of everything we do, and that has become part of who we are, part of our DNA. And then we basically embarked on a process which we called structure for growth, because obviously coming out of that era of decline, we needed to set our organization up for growth. And in that process, we create sort of a number of business units, which we wanted to have end-to-end control in their design. So again, that we can get the decision-making deeper into our organization. The second part was what we called hire for excellence. And this speaks to the quality of the talent we have in our organization and always had in our organization. As we restructured our business, we actually took a number of management levels out of our organization, to make sure that we push the decision-making down. And through that process, we also really focused on the talent, the timber we had in our own organization. And we appointed colleagues with deep experience in our organization. You saw the level of transformation that we've achieved in this business, both from a racial and gender perspective. So we also believe that they are going to become industry leaders through generations and set up the next sort of generations for success, as we embarked on this journey. And then it was a bottom-up planning process.
Arrie, So sorry to come in there, Arrie, but we're getting a lot of detail from you that we are about to explore with the panel as well. And I'm really interested in the kind of areas that you have covered already, because I want to get a little bit more detail and I want to just probe some of the areas that you've already been speaking about. So apologies
Absolutely.
for interrupting you there. And I'm sure our viewers are actually going to have a lot of questions for you on the areas you've covered already. So I just want to remind our viewers at this point that before we kick off the actual discussion, there is a live chat function that you can use. Please do make use of that live chat function. All you have to do is send your questions through or send your comments through. And please make sure that you just notify me as to who exactly you want those questions asked to, so that if you'd like them addressed to Arrie or Piet or Andile, I'll make sure that those questions, as many as possible, get through to them for you. So Piet, I just want to take it from that point that Arrie was talking about, where they were on the basically on the cusp of this huge journey. They seemed to have a sense of what had gone wrong in the last 10 years, and they obviously were on this very intimidating place in which many businesses currently find themselves. How does one go about carrying out an assessment of what is required, how courageous you ought to be in terms of the decisions you make and the direction that you take? That must be a situation that many businesses, large and small, in our country or on our continent are facing right now, Piet.
Yes, Joanne, certainly. I think what impressed me about the Absa approach to this was the deliberateness. I think very often large organizations tend to just drift along, go with the flow. I think what Absa did was very courageous to say it's actually, and I think Arrie phrased it as an opportunity. So rather than seeing it as Barclays withdrawing and leaving them in a difficult situation, I think they saw it as an opportunity, as an opportunity to change, as an opportunity to reset, to become more African. And I think that is something that a lot of businesses can learn from the process, is the seeing the opportunities rather than the threats and the downside of it.
You set yourself this ambitious target as Absa, Arrie. You wanted to double your market share to 12% of African banking revenues in a matter of 3 years. I mean, many people would have said that's a pretty impossible target. How did you actually manage to achieve that?
Jan, I'm just going to make sure that I do unmute in the process. I think, Joanne, what's important again is that context conversation that we had before, because we saw a period of sort of extended decline, and part of the reset is really to set some form of aspiration, which speaks to the pride in the organization. And because the process that we've gone through was such a deep process and such an all-inclusive process, the final outcome was very much the voice of the organization, rather than the voice of a few people, with some sort of consultancy input into the process. The organization felt that they were better than what the results were showing. And by the time we got to the final outcome, the sort of aspiration was something which the organization believed in. Those are very aspirational targets, but it sets a sense of ambition, it sets a sense of direction. And very importantly, it sets a sense of intent, which is what we wanted to achieve as we started, driving this new culture into our organization.
And of course, it's really important, Arrie, to draw attention to the fact that you saw your sustainability as being driven by transformation. Now, how serious were you about that in a country where we know many businesses have still not bought into the idea of transformation, which is a very strange thing, but very, very true. And some of them that have bought into it are doing so rather grudgingly.
Yeah, I think, context is very important, specifically in the South African and the African environment. And more so for us, because we were under the control of a global bank for a long period of time, which obviously had a different set of priorities. And in that process, as I said earlier, you do become disconnected with the nuances and the requirements of the different markets that you're operating in. In South Africa, we've got very specific transformational requirements, but in the other markets, we've also got similar sort of transformational requirements that is critical. And so for us to reconnect with our markets was at the core of what we needed to do. Apart from that, we've had colleagues that have been in our organization for many years that have done phenomenal work, but through this deep organizational structure, somehow got hidden in the structures. And by us delayering that organization and sort of almost lifting the bushels, so that the light could shine, we really committed to our own sort of talent in this, in this organization. And if you think about the people we put both in the group and the RBB Exco, people like Bongiwe, people like Chiwela, people like Faisal, and people like Jeff, people like Tatu. These are all people that have been in the organization on average at the time when we created that Exco, 15 years, knows the organization deeply, knows the market deeply, knows the customers very much. So by putting them into those roles, we really got the transformation that we were. When you play in a team or when you in an Exco and you get more diversity rather than less, the ownership that comes out of that process is more relevant, so much more sort of what your environment needs and one example. So that now is core of how we do the business, and I think the results have spoken for itself off the back of that process. So something we're incredibly proud of, and something that we're very serious about going forward, because it is all about that diversity and the quality that comes from a process like that.
Yeah. Arrie, I want to, for a moment, just Andile, perhaps you can reflect for me here. I want to pause and spend a little bit of time on this issue because it came up in one of our very early webinars together where we spoke about African leadership for African businesses and how that plays out on the continent. This commitment to transformation really makes a lot of business sense, doesn't it, Andile?
Thank you, Joanne. It certainly does. What really stands out though, I just want to take a step back, is how the Absa group really balance the process of strategy formulation right at conceptual level or at conceptual stage with some values that are very important to them. And the fact that right at that in the beginning, they valued the inclusion of all the stakeholders, it speaks volumes because it does tell you that they were clear that within that space of uncertainty, within that space of not knowing how to go, but really prepared saying, we'll soldier on, they did value that if they bring in all the stakeholders, all the role players, really to derive synergies and to derive energy from that, it's quite stands out for me. And also being able to say, as much as we want to reposition ourselves, it's very important that we do not follow, that we do not forget that we still need to run with the transformation agenda. We still need to recognize that we've got wealth and ample experience in-house, that we shouldn't really look beyond that, can get everyone to move with us. So this is essentially that whole conceptual approach that then for me as an academic really then says these are the learning points that really extend that body of knowledge that after the school will start saying, let's take all this and bring it in how we deliver our programs, in how we have structured our program. We often as the academic sector being criticized for putting people on the labor market to only know how to regurgitate what was in the textbook. But now, here's a real life case. Here's a real life case that says, within what has been happening in the country, no one could have anticipated all what has been brought forth by the pandemic, by the recent unrest in the country. But when you start looking at this Absa journey, at this Absa story, you begin to say, here are tools that we can begin to really incorporate in how we approach stuff. And I get a sense as well, Joe, that the Absa group, as much as it must have been really intimidating, as you mentioned, they're part of this global player. All of a sudden, they no longer running with them. How do you begin to put pieces together? But they were not afraid to say, we will depart from how things are done. Can we run along as long as we know where we're trying to get at? Pause there, Joanne.
Thank you, Andile. So Arrie, of course, you were also engaged in this difficult transition from a bank with Absa's history to one that could be identified as distinctly African and all-embracing. I'm just curious to know how that rebranding exercise was received on the continent. Do people buy that a bank that has its roots in South Africa's past can actually be relevant, can be embracing to Africans of all kinds, from all backgrounds? Arrie?
And thanks. I think there may be some challenges with my video, so apologies for that. I think it's just a reception issue. Joanne, part of the process we went through as we separated, from Barclays and as we built the new strategy and set up our organization, was really to think about our brand and what do we want our brand to be. And I think what a lot of people don't realize, in a part of the continent we were Barclays, known as Barclays, and in some of those markets, Joanne, the word for banking in the local language is Barclays. So it shows you how deeply ingrained that Barclays brand were in some of those markets. And of course, in South Africa, we were Absa, but Absa had a very different meaning. So as we went through this process, we also had to make some brand choices. We ultimately decided to stay with Absa, but with it, we needed a very different meaning, one that could connect with all the markets, the Africanness that I've spoken about earlier, the Africanacity. And that is obviously the sort of rebranded Absa, if I can call it that came out of that process. We first launched it in South Africa in the first year, which was obviously a very successful sort of rebranding exercise. And then as part of our separation agreement with Barclays, we needed to rebrand across all the other markets within a period of 3 years. And we rebranded in all those markets in sort of, I think it was in a period of about 3 months, market by market, to the Absa brand. And when you replace a brand that is so established in a market, it's a very risky, very, very challenging process, especially if you're a bank, because you're systemic to that market.
I'm going to actually bring Piet in at this point, because Piet, it can't be easy to do this kind of transition on a continent that is very aware of your history. Do you think that customers might have approached this with a little bit of cynicism, shall we say, or has the branding exercise been so effective as to have brought more people under the Absa banner, do you think? Piet?
Joanne, I can't really speak for the effectiveness of the rebranding exercise, but I think what is important is that, of course, there's a customer's perceptions out there, and there's the reality of what you are trying to do as an organization, and that can often be very difficult to match the two. In other words, to change perceptions in the market. I'm not sure if Arrie could share with us perhaps whether they've been able to measure that in some way. I think the approach was certainly, from an academic perspective, was the right one, but did it hit the perceptions of customers out there? That is something that I'd also be very interested to hear.
Yeah, Arrie, how was the rebranding exercise received? I mean, did people in the market buy into the whole Africanacity evolution of the brand?
Joanne, can you hear me now?
I can, thank you, Arrie. It's a lot better than before.
I'm glad to hear that. So I think, as Piet also said there, Joanne, when you change a brand, it's a big thing for any company, but more so when you're a bank. Obviously the planning that has gone into this process, the rigor that has gone into this process, has been significant. And so far, the brand change has been very successful. But a brand is something which builds up value over a long period of time. We're only 3 years into that journey, and at this stage, everything is going in the direction that we want to. But we have to keep on building, all the different parts of our business. We have to build our customer value propositions, our product experiences, our customer experiences in our channels, the way we position ourselves in those markets, our social agendas, our financial performance. Those are all components that ultimately impact the value, the value of the brand. So you can safely say that we're a young brand on the continent. We're an African brand, and we are committed to this brand building journey as we continue to go on this path. Our sort of performance so far is 100% in line with the expectation that we set ourselves, but it's early in the journey. We've got a long way to go.
I'm curious about your digital journey, because like any other business on the continent now, you had to reckon with digital and technological advancements in 2018, and there was a perception at that time that Absa had fallen behind its competitors in the field in regard to that. How much energy has gone into changing that picture in the last few years, Arrie?
When we reset the strategy at a group level first, we were very clear that we were going to go from a bank that relied on its traditional strengths to a bank that will be fully digitized over time. So we made that choice very deliberately. And then, of course, as we went into all the different businesses, you would also have seen that digital was at the core of that, of those business strategies. So whether you're in the retail business or the business banking business or the corporate business, it doesn't matter. Digital is at the core of what we wanted to do as an organization. So it was front and center for us. And therefore, all the business plans, had a very strong digital transformation, modernization sort of feel to it. And that means we aligned the organization around this digital journey. Digitization is a continuous journey, and something which we've made a lot of progress on in the last couple of years, because the whole organization was aligned behind that narrative, just like we were aligned behind rebranding, aligned behind separation, aligned behind the new operating model. So you can see we made big, bold choices, but digitization was one of those that was right at the core. As we got through the first phase of our RBB strategy reset, which was our fixed phase, we got all the basics back into play. We're now in the second horizon, and the second horizon for us is all about even more digitization of our journeys and our experiences. And of course, this has been accelerated through what we've seen in the world in the last 18 months. So somehow that timing has also worked well for us.
Andile, this is something that keeps coming up in our discussions, right? The commitment to going digital. How strongly do businesses need to commit to that wholeheartedly, lest they be left behind, Andile?
Thank you, Joe. I think the most important thing, though, is that digitization or digital transformation shouldn't really run ahead of customer service. We shouldn't forget that that's just a platform for businesses to deliver their business. So one shouldn't really forget that the primary and the paramount objective is that you impact the customer out there. So I often stress that when the planning of what to bring in terms of the digital tools, that should be underpinned by what you're the impact that you want to make on your customer. Then it becomes easy then to, instead of letting the digital tools lead you, but your customer service, the difference that you want to make, what you want to put across runs ahead, then it gets underlined. Or the other way is that digitization should be underpinned and underscored by your business model, what you're trying to make. And we often see that, if I were to make that analogy, Joanne, even within the academic space, there's this buzz, there's fourth industrialization, we need to, but I often say that still doesn't detract from the value of teaching and learning function. It's all about teaching, it's all about the students. So, which should be the same thing even with the business. So I feel very strongly, I'm not really saying where our digitization is actually streamlining our processes. It's actually allowing us to make things different. I'm all for that, but that should really be entrenched, deeply entrenched in what you're trying. If it moves the needle in terms of customer service, why not? Rather than digitization for the sake of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Arrie, during this process of change, and we bring the human side of this into it again, you've alluded it to, already to this important issue in your introduction. So you had these 130,000 conversations with your employees, with your stakeholders. I'm just keen to know why you thought those were necessary and what you actually got out of them.
And thank you very much. I think, as we said from the start, is we needed to reconnect our organization to our markets, to our customers, and really get input across all the stakeholders as we embarked on this journey. So that bottom-up process for us was critical, not just to get buy-in from our colleagues, but also to start sending a very different message, into our markets around reconnecting across all these different stakeholders. And the feedback was no different, to what we saw in the results up to that point, around the fact that we're not aligned with our customer needs, we're not in touch with the market, and you saw that in our results. So again, you can see the deliberateness in our design to start doing things very differently, as an African organization, and how we've gone about, this reset process. So the connection that we get through that process, the emotional connection that we get through that process, was a very powerful part. And of course, that then allows us to push the decision making and distribute the authority throughout our organization, so that the people that were all part of that process, feel the accountability, feel the ownership, and start taking that ownership as we try to energize this organization to come out of this the separation process with Barclays. And hence the fact that you've seen the results that we've seen in the first 3 years, as we've as where we are today.
So Piet, I find this hugely interesting, because we don't often see either our customers or our employees as that astute. Many businesses would think that, the leadership team has a very good idea of the direction in which the business should head, but the actual people on the ground don't necessarily have that. But of course, they do have an excellent window into the needs of their customers, because they're dealing with them on a daily basis. And consumers seem to know what they want, right? Because they're also comparing it with what their colleagues, their friends, their relatives are experiencing in the marketplace. It seems to me not to recognize that would be to patronize both groups when you are working with a huge turnaround strategy of this nature, Piet?
Yes, Joanne, it's actually, there's an academic from Oxford, Richard Whittington, coined the term open strategy, and I think it's something that we are seeing more and more of the leading organizations recognizing the value of open innovation and involving customers and employees in processes. I think Absa did it at a particularly large scale, but I think it's very, if you look at the traditional views of strategy, it's almost, it belongs to the top management of the organization. The top management will think for the organization, and middle managers are just implementers. And I think that is a very, very old-fashioned way, and not a very effective way of thinking about strategy. So I think what we've seen with Absa is a very large-scale move towards open strategy, both in terms of its creation and involving customers, employees in the creation process, but also being very transparent. I mean, the very fact that we are here talking about Absa's strategy and Absa's reset in a very open and frank manner is testimony to that there is room for openness and transparency in strategy. And as you say, to not do that, I think, would be to ignore a massive resource at your disposal.
It could not have been an easy process for you, because of course you were trying to triangulate colleagues, customers, and accountability during this process. No doubt you came through a number of hurdles, or had to overcome a number of hurdles during this time. But there have also been a couple of important developments since you set out on this strategy, right? And I think probably the most significant one in the last couple of years would have been COVID. We know that COVID saw a massive increase in bad debts, and you had quite a particular lending strategy that you were working on at this time. Just give me a sense of some of the general obstacles you faced, and then what this huge COVID disruption meant for the 2018 strategy. Arrie?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think what people on the call today would have heard, that I think we had to make some very bold decisions since the announcement of the exit of this investment, around the separation process, the rebranding process, the new strategy process, setting up the different businesses. I think we've gone about it in a specific way, because we wanted to get everybody's buy-in, and I think that worked for us. I think Piet spoke to that now. But I think, we were very clear that we needed to build credibility and we needed to build confidence, as an organization, because people are not just going to believe us because we said we're going to double our market share, within a specific period of time. So the first phase of our journey was all about confidence. And, because we've set up the business in a distributed way with accountability deeper across our organization, it does allow you to be a lot more agile and a lot more nimble and a lot more active and reactive to your market and your conditions. So you would have seen our COVID response was a very holistic response, to the needs, of South Africa at the time, and similarly across the other African markets. And that was a direct response to the changes that we've gone through, to the cultural changes that we've made, and as a direct reaction to our closer to colleague and closer to customer, the first design principles that I've spoken about right up front, Joanne. So the first thing was the response to our colleagues and making sure our colleagues were safe and making sure our colleagues were protected when we went into a level 5 lockdown. Remember, none of us understood what that meant. So a tremendous amount of uncertainty at the time. But again, the leadership came together through that process in the most amazing way, because these are colleagues that have been part of the organization for a long time, colleagues that have been chosen to lead, colleagues that have built some confidence in the process. And we've spoken about the collective wisdom a little bit earlier. I think that's probably a good phrase. So you saw a very holistic response around keeping colleagues safe, and then you saw a very holistic response to our customers in the market. The Absa response was pretty unique in the sense that we acknowledge that customers must be extremely uncertain, extremely anxious about their livelihoods, around their jobs. So we've got to make it as simple and as easy as possible for them to engage us as a bank, to help them and give them some form of certainty. And it's as a consequence of the decisions that we made a couple of years earlier, and how those decisions have embedded themselves into the organization, but also into the culture of the organization. And again, I think that sort of ownership across your firm allows you to adjust quickly to sort of circumstances that change in the macro environment, which is completely outside your control. So I think we've made these choices well in advance, and they've worked for us because we've empowered the organization to the points that Piet and yourself and others have made a little bit earlier. I'm comfortable with the pocket there. I think we're very comfortable with and very proud, in fact, of the responses that we've seen around COVID and in the latest sort of KZN scenario, as we looked after colleagues and as we looked after customers as a consequence. And as we see now, a year and a half later, the customers that got help through this process, coming out of that environment, and the appreciation for what you've done as an organization, is a very good outcome.
Let's talk a bit about this looting issue in KwaZulu-Natal, parts of Gauteng as well. And that's something I think we're still reeling from, Arrie. Many of us didn't think it possible. And that was a naive response to the societal conditions and backdrop against which we live. We've seen thousands of businesses destroyed. We've seen a possible insurrection, which suggests political instability. How do you begin to remold your strategy when something this disruptive happens?
Jan, so I think the KZN scenario has been a very difficult scenario. Of course, there's the parts that are outside of our control, but obviously we have to deal with the parts that are within our control. You've seen some of the comments around the destruction that has happened, in terms of infrastructure. If I just think about the banking sector, we've had over 200 branches completely vandalized. We've had over 1,000 ATMs completely destroyed in the process. And of course, Absa also suffered significant losses as part of that process, both in terms of branches being vandalized ATMs being destroyed, businesses that we bank, small businesses, larger businesses, corporate structures, significantly impacted through this process. And again, what we've seen is not just an organization coming together, but an industry and industries coming together across the board, to step in, and help society in that process. And again, I think from our perspective, immediately making sure that our colleagues were safe through that process, immediately making sure that, we provide them with airtime so that there's connectivity, we provide them with food as quickly as possible, give them certainty through this process, aligning at a banking industry level around our responses and collaboration, and of course with other industries like retailers in this process to start a process of rebuilding in that, in that environment. So again, a very difficult macro environment to deal with, political environment to deal with. But I think as we focus on what is within our control, the focus for us now is on stability, recovery, and then rebuild. And it's very important that I think we take some deep lessons from this process as we think about the rebuilding process off the back of what we've experienced.
Ndile, let me bring you back in here, because there's been a feeling in the last few years that the public doesn't always see banks harmonizing with their customers' needs, or that we see them as a large inanimate corporate. We don't see the humanity in these organizations. We don't see kind of social responsibility in perhaps rebuilding businesses, for example, after the kind of looting we saw in KwaZulu-Natal and other areas of the country. Exactly what do banks need to do, or any businesses, in fact, that function in this environment? What is required of them at a time like this in our country?
There is a saying, Joe, that if people would bother to listen to you after they realize that you care about them. And it's not something that you can fake. It's not something that will be superficial or artificial. They've got to perceive, they've got to discern a tangible sense of that really they matter, that they are central in your decision making. And that's the reason why I take my hat off to Arrie and team, because what they've done is to really allow the business principles, so to speak, to really cue or line up with social good, with recognizing that the communities out there, our societies out there, from the concept of sustainability, the successes of any business is intertwined with our communities out there. So it's very important at this juncture, at what we see in this country, that businesses really demonstrate quite loudly and vocally, though, the authenticity and the seriousness in wanting to make that difference, and saying that communities out there, when there are challenges, when there are social problems, we want to be part of the solution. We want to make a difference. And the only way that you could do that is really that your decision making, those processes are really kind of permeated with this need of wanting to make a difference. So I would say that's actually how the business should really look at this. And just piggybacking on the concept of open strategy that Prof. Venter made mention of, what that is saying, it is underscoring this migration that we're seeing globally, that management is no longer about one person. It's actually collaborating. It's actually a team. So you're finding that flat structure, we're saying we're all moving together in managing.
Thank you, Ndile. So we've got a number of questions to get to. Thank you very much to our members of the audience for sending us some of these really brilliant questions. So I'm going to ask our panelists just to keep your answers very short from this point onwards, please, as succinct as possible, because some of them are complex questions. Let's start for this question with this question from Tsepo for Arrie. Having achieved the milestone you have, is this the end game for Absa? Which specific markets or countries in Africa do you still want to venture into, Arrie?
Tsepo, thank you very much for that question. No, this is not the end game for us. I think, as I said earlier, this is only our Horizon 1 deliverable. We've got very clear ambitions for this next horizon. And part of that is how we think about Africa. But it's very early for us to say at this stage whether we want to venture into other markets. At this stage, no doubt, we will continue to look at the African sort of continent and ask ourselves when we're ready, which markets we will move into. But at this stage, the focus is on the markets that we are in and making sure that we're optimizing our situation and rebuilding our leadership position in all those markets first.
Thanks, Arrie. A question for Piet and Arrie. Piet, I'll let you go first. This is from Dirk. How long do you keep a specific strategy before you need to reset to stay ahead of the market? Piet?
Yes, I think for me, it's really about constantly thinking about strategy. I don't think we should think about strategy as a 3 or a 5 year plan that is, sort of executed after 5 years and then stays in place for a long time. I think what Arrie has referred to is also the diversity that allows for good strategic decision making. And for me, you should, as a team and as a board, that you should be constantly making strategic decisions to take you in the next into the next sources of advantage. So I would say, rather than thinking in terms of time frames, I would suggest that it's about understanding what business you're in, where you are going, and making decisions that align with that.
Andile, a question for in regard to the issue of education. Are the current business schools curricula adequate to equip the modern day business leaders, particularly in an African context? That's from Joshua.
It's never, it's difficult to ever say adequate. It's never, it is always an ongoing process, because remember, you need, if I were to borrow the term reset, depending on the ruling, on the prevailing conditions, you constantly need to look at what is needed, at what is relevant, and you come and adjust your program qualification mix. Presently at the SBL, the way that we do that is to make sure that we're in contact with the commerce industry out there, and they're really an integral part of our program qualification mix process, so to speak. And that's why you see that often every year or at some fixed period, we have got independent reviews where you bring in actually people from the industry and from the academic space as well, just to make sure that we're still relevant. And more importantly, that we answer the real life conditions, challenges that people out there are faced with.
Thanks, Andile. Arrie, a question from Gavin Isaacs. What is your strategy for distinguishing yourself from the other big banks in South Africa? And what is the strategy regarding emerging and very competitive banks? Good question.
In the South African context, and also across the African context, we're very clear we're a universal bank, which means we serve all the customers in our market. And that must also allow us to compete with new entrants. So it's very much around how quickly we can sort of change ourselves from the inside out to make sure that we can continue to be relevant. But our sort of differentiation sits in our ability to be able to deliver the full banking proposition rather than just a payment component or a lending component or a savings component. And that for us is critical. It's the bank assurance model that we now drive. Our customers can borrow, save, transact, and be protected as part of our full proposition.
Thanks very much for that, Arrie. Another question for you from Putela, who says the younger generation spends a lot of time on social media apps, and I think fintech companies will most likely develop solutions embedded within these apps. What strategy is the bank developing to appeal to the fast-paced, sugar rush world of young people?
Sugar rush. I must remember that frame. I haven't heard that before. But I think what is core now is, a big bank like ours can't operate at the pace of fintechs. So we think about partnering and embracing fintechs. There's a number of examples across our own business, for example, where we collaborated with fintechs. I just looked at a solution last week, in the agri space again, where we will be collaborating with the fintech in the life insurance space, short-term insurance space. So, I think that be relevant, and then for corporates to form part of that collaborative process, as we've heard from Andile, embracing a business model going forward. We can't do it all on our own.
Right, Arrie, thank you for that. We are certainly straining that internet connection, so I'm not going to put any more questions to you, but I want to thank you for participating in this conversation today. It's been a really interesting one. Arrie, thank you for sharing your insights on what exactly went into Absa Bank's journey. I think to end off, I'm just going to ask for one quick last comment from Piet and Andile. Piet, I think having this kind of conversation where large corporates in South Africa are able to come out and in a very open way, as you alluded earlier, share some of the important business strategies, the difficulties they experienced along the way. These are important conversations for particularly, I think, young people or people who've just entered the business supplier chains, those companies that are perhaps moving from one level to another and scaling their business. These are really useful conversations to have, are they not, Piet?
Yes, Joanne, I think Andile referred to it earlier as a living case study, and it's certainly, I think there's a lot to learn from Absa having gone through the strategy reset process on top of COVID and the recent lootings that we've seen. That couldn't have been an easy change process, and there's a lot to learn, I think, for any business of any size from the Absa experience and the lessons that they have learned from it.
Yeah. Andile, would you agree? And are there elements that you're thinking now need to be brought into the curriculum that may be very useful for your students to actually study?
I do. It's quite important from our perspective as we are on a drive to really include the African pedagogies in our programs, in our curriculum. So it's very important to really take leave at looking at our South African companies, really showing us how do they take that step in looking at the continent, not at the continent as an extension of what we do. And also importantly that what we've been doing, we thought that when you including African pedagogies, it means just to have a word Absa. But now what's happening, it's something tangible that we're looking our own businesses, really navigating this space. So it's the epistemic value. It's immense. I'm so excited about it.
Thank you very much for that, Andile. So that is where we're going to leave it for today. Thank you so much for joining us on these Business Day Dialogues live in partnership with UNISA Graduate School of Business Leadership. Thank you to Absa's Arrie Rautenbach for generously sharing his insights into the Absa Retail and Business Banking Division's strategy in the last few years and in the time to come, as you've heard. Thank you to Mr. Andile Nobachi and Professor Piet Venter for their academic analysis. And thank you to you, our viewers, for joining us today and really posing some excellent questions. From me, Joanne Joseph, keep safe, take care. Bye-bye.